The night had settled over the city, casting long shadows across the bustling streets. The bright neon sign of Chipotle Mexican Grill flickered and hummed, inviting diners inside. I stood behind the counter, clad in my usual uniform, ready to face another evening of burritos, bowls, and the usual chaos. Little did I know, this night would be far from ordinary. As I prepared for the dinner rush, I couldn't shake the strange sensation that had been gnawing at me all day. The restaurant was packed with customers, each engrossed in their own world of sizzling fajitas and steaming rice. But something was off, and it wasn't the occasional wrong order or impatient customer. It started with a group of three, an elderly couple and a young woman who walked in just after sunset. They looked perfectly normal, if a bit peculiar. The man had a long, unkempt beard, and his eyes seemed to carry a deep sadness. The woman's clothing was out of date, like something from the 1950s, and her gaze was fixed on the floor. The young woman with them was jittery, her eyes darting around as if she expected something to leap out at her from the shadows. I served them as I would any other customers, but as they sat down, a chill crept over me. It was as if an invisible hand had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart. I shook it off, attributing it to my overactive imagination. As the night wore on, more strange occurrences began to unfold. A family of four sat in a corner booth, their faces ashen. They hardly touched their food and whispered to each other, their eyes darting toward the front door every few seconds. They left abruptly, their meals untouched. Then there was the persistent feeling of being watched. Every time I turned around, I caught glimpses of people staring at me from the corners of my vision. But when I looked directly, they'd turn away or pretend to be engrossed in their meals. The tension in the restaurant was palpable, but I couldn't put my finger on what was causing it. I glanced at the clock. It was almost closing time. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that the strange night was finally coming to an end. But that's when it happened. The lights flickered and then went out completely. The restaurant plunged into darkness, and a chorus of startled gasps and whispers erupted from the patrons. Emergency lights kicked in, casting eerie, dim pools of light in the restaurant. I fumbled for my phone to use its flashlight to help guide customers to the exit. My heart pounded as I struggled to maintain order in the chaos. As people began to file out, I noticed the elderly couple and the young woman still sitting at their table. They were the only ones who hadn't moved, and something about the way they sat frozen sent shivers down my spine. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice trembling. "You need to leave. We're closing." No response. I approached their table, my steps hesitant. The dim emergency light made their faces appear even more ghostly, and their eyes were fixed on something in the corner of the room. I followed their gaze and saw a shadowy figure standing there. My breath caught in my throat as I strained to see who it was, but the darkness swallowed them all. I looked back at the straight trio at the table, but now they were gone too, as if they had never been there at all. Fear gripped me, and I rushed towards the exit, desperate to get out of the restaurant. But just as I reached the door, a gust of icy wind swept through the room, extinguishing the emergency lights. I was plunged into total darkness. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for the doorknob. My heart pounded in my chest, and my hands were slick with sweat. I tried to call for help, but my voice caught in my throat. Then, a soft voice whispered from the blackness, Don't be afraid." I froze, terror gripping every fiber of my being. The voice was close, rushed beside me, yet I couldn't see anyone. "Who's there?" I managed to stammer. "It's okay," the voice continued soothingly. "We're just here to talk." Suddenly, the emergency lights flickered back on, and the room was bathed in their eerie glow. I blinked in the sudden brightness and looked around, but there was no one there. Shaken, I stumbled out of the restaurant, my heart still racing. The night air felt cold and crisp against my skin, and I took deep breaths, trying to calm myself. As I stood there, I noticed that the lights inside the restaurant had returned to normal. The neon sign hummed steadily, and the bustling street outside seemed like a different world altogether. I couldn't explain what had just happened. Had it all been a hallucination brought on by stress? Or had something truly inexplicable occurred in that restaurant? I never went back to work at Chipotle Mexican Grill after that night. The experience haunted me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me out into the darkness. Even now, as I recount this story, the memory of that eerie night sends a shiver down my spine. Perhaps there are places where the veil between the living and the unknown is thin, where unexplained events can unfold without rhyme or reason. Chipotle Mexican Grill, a seemingly ordinary restaurant, had become one such place that night, a place where the mundane and the supernatural collided, leaving me with more questions than answers.